All right, gang, welcome to the final lecture in our discussion of world religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Shintoism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So this final lecture, I'm tacking on to this YouTube series because in the course that I teach on campus, I ended up with an extra week early on in my career and needed something to sort of fill in that last week. And so I thought it would be interesting to discuss how theists. Now, I am a Christian, and a lot of this applies to Christianity. You will hear a lot of Christian apologists make the arguments that I'm making, but these are not. This lecture is not about proving or disproving Christianity per se. This is about theist, anyone who believes that God exists. What are the main arguments that are used to prove the existence of God if you're a theist? So essentially what this is how a theist would answer an atheist. And so what I did was I just came up with the top three arguments that theists use, and I discussed those in the lecture. And so we're not going to discuss all three of them. We're only going to discuss two in this lecture. But before we get started, let's define some terms, make sure we're all on the same page, right? So theism, that is a belief in an eternal divine being or beings if you're polytheistic. So theism is the foundational category for belief in divinity. You can be a monotheist or a polytheist or some other kind of theist, but theism would be the sort of the foundational understanding as opposed to atheism. So in English and in other languages, you put an A in front of the word, then you negate the term, right? So atheism would be that you believe that an eternal being does not exist. So there's a couple of ways people define atheism. Some people define atheism as the way I define it, that it is a belief that something does not exist. Some people will define it as just saying it is the absence of belief. But what I've discovered in my years of teaching, my years of engaging atheists, that most atheists that are genuine atheists are not content to just not believe. Most are more comfortable with espousing a position that nothing exists. Divinity doesn't exist. So you have theism, divinity exists, atheism, divinity does not exist, but then there's agnosticism. It is a state of knowing or uncertainty. So you have, I believe, that's a theist. I don't believe, that's an atheist. I don't know, that's an agnostic. I wrote a book a few years ago in George Washington, and I did all these different podcasts and radio shows and things like that to promote the book. And I found myself on a podcast. And in the beginning, when I would talk about the book, I would really go look at each podcast that wanted me on and try to see if maybe I aligned with them and maybe it was a good audience for me and that sort of thing. But I was getting so many requests that I finally just stopped looking. I'm like, I'll do whatever. I don't care. If it's an opportunity to talk about the book, I don't care. I'll go on the podcast. And so I ended up on this podcast, and you can find it on YouTube somewhere, where this atheist wanted to interview me. And I didn't realize I was going on a podcast of an atheist. I actually thought the guy was a believer, a fellow Christian, but he wasn't. And I think if I would have done my homework, I'd have been ready, but I was not ready for his questions. He asked me some question from you know, from the Old Testament, like, why does God want to kill babies or something like that? I was like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And so if you go back and you find that interview on YouTube, you'll see that I was completely unprepared and did not do a good job, I don't think, at defending my position because I didn't know that's what we were doing and I wasn't prepared. Um, but in that interview, that I asked that guy, I said, what do you believe? Because I genuinely trying to figure out what his position was. What do you believe? He said, well, I'm really an agnostic atheist. I'm like, that doesn't exist. There's no such thing as an agnostic atheist. Atheist has a firm position. I do not believe. There's no such thing as divinity. Whereas agnostics, like, kind of still working through it, or I just don't know, or I don't care, right? You can be an agnostic that really just doesn't care, but you don't know. So, and then the last term is apologetics. It's from a Greek word, apologia, which means defense or to defend. So it is the science of defending theism from atheists or agnostics. The key, so what apologetics is focused on is it's focused on developing sound arguments that are logically reasonable to prove their point. Apologetics is heavy on philosophy and heavy on science. And so most apologetic arguments will blend those two. And you'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. But let's talk about the different types of theology that you find in theism. You have natural and revealed theology. So revealed theology, that is information about God from sacred scripture. So the Tanakh, the New Testament, Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, those are sacred texts. And that's where those religions are getting information about deity from revealed theology. These things that are revealed to prophets or revealed to persons through history. Whereas natural theology, this is information about God from the natural world. I said just a minute ago that apologetic arguments are based heavily on philosophy and heavily on science. So what most apologists will do, theist apologists, will generally concentrate on three different arguments that are a blend of philosophy and science. And those three arguments are the ontological argument, the moral argument, and the cosmological argument. We are not going to talk about the ontological argument in this lecture. Quite frankly, I don't really use it, and I don't know many people that do. But there is an aspect of the ontological argument that has been very helpful for theists through the years, and that is Anselm of Canterbury, who really kind of was the main proponent of this ontological argument. In Anselm's writings, he defined God, and his definition of God is that which nothing greater can be imagined, right? The way that we sum that up in apologetics is we say that the definition of God is a maximally great being. It's really important to understand what Anselm is saying here and the implications for his definition. So I'm on a laptop computer. I'm using what is this, an HP? I don't know. Yes, an HP Envy, whatever that is. If I can imagine a better computer, right? Like, let's say I think this is the best computer out there. This computer is awesome. It's the best computer out there. But I can imagine better computer, and that better computer is the better computer. When it comes to deity, whatever you believe about God, if you can imagine a greater or more powerful or more present, if you can imagine a God with greater attributes than the God that you serve, then that greater God is God, because the definition of God is that God is maximally great. And we talked about that a little bit in Christian theology, where God is all knowing, all present, omniscient, is the in every category maximally great. And that'll come up again in just a minute. So, but the three arguments theists generally use are ontological, moral, and cosmological. Let's talk a little bit about theism and science. So I suspect that unless you spend a lot of time thinking about this sort of thing, then you might think that science and religion are at odds with each other. And you could not be more incorrect, because throughout the course of human history, the relationship between religion and science has been really strong. In fact, most of the greatest scientific advancements that were made in the history of humanity were made by men and women who were professed theists. Newton, Kepler, Pascal, Bacon, Robert Boyle, all of these were deeply religious people that were pursuing the study of natural science as an sort of an aspect of their curiosity about God's creation. There are typically, what you find is people who are atheist will say, how can you say that, Richard? Because Copernicus, he was rejected by the church, or Galileo was rejected by the church, or there's this constant conflict between Darwin and the church. What I say to that is there are certainly periods of human history where science and theology crashed. And in terms of Copernicus and Galileo, there's certainly no excuse for how that played out. It's important that the Roman Catholic Church, which we've discussed, the Roman Catholic Church when we discussed Christianity, the Roman Catholic Church, when it came to Copernicus and Galileo, took the position of the majority of the scientists when they tried to figure out if Copernicus and Galileo were delving into heresy or not. And they took the advice of other scientists, which said Copernicus and Galileo were wrong. Turns out they weren't wrong. And then Darwin, that's a different story regarding what happened there. But just know that throughout human history, the relationship between theism and science is pretty strong. So there's two primary arguments that theists use. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to prove that God exists. So if I am trying to prove to someone that doesn't believe that God exists, I'm trying to prove that God does exist. One of the arguments I may use is the moral argument. Let's talk about it. So the moral argument proposes that for a moral standard to exist, there must be an ultimate moral point of reference. The ultimate moral point of reference is God. So in Western civilization, we have laws, or even outside of Western civilization. Well, let's use as an example. Let's say that you and I were in a room together and you had a brand new iPhone, and I was using some old school, Samsung that didn't even have a camera. And I saw your iPhone. I'm like, dude, that's an awesome phone. And I just reached over and grabbed it and put it in my pocket and said, hey, thanks. This is mine now. You didn't offer it to me. You didn't agree to that I could take it. And I take your phone. You're going to say, you can't have my phone. And then I say, why not? I want it. And then you would appeal to right and wrong. you would ultimately say to me, you can't take my phone because it's the wrong thing to do. Even if there's no law that prohibits it, you would say to me that it's the wrong thing to do. What you are doing in that instance is you are appealing to this universal aspect, or this universal concept, rather, of right and wrong. And the moral argument says that if there is a moral concept of ultimate right and wrong, then you have to have an ultimate moral point of reference for that. And that reference point is God. So the moral argument does not apply to cultural relativism, like laws or notions of good and bad that may change with the times. And we're not talking about, you could say that this culture over here thinks that this is right and the rest of the world thinks it's wrong. We're talking about the mainstream of human thinking all says that murdering an innocent person is wrong, theft is wrong, lying is wrong, things like that. And it's not wrong just because the people decided it was wrong. You can watch children playing, and if one child takes another child's toy, then these children with no real concept of the rules understand that that's wrong. The kid who had their toy taken will probably start crying to their mom. He took my toy, right? Because there is this idea that humans are aware of this ultimate aspect of morality that exists, and theists say that that exists as evidence that God exists. So if you appeal to this general notion of morality, then you're saying that there is an author of supreme morality. Theists would say that that is God. And here's really the meat of it. If there is no moral right and wrong, then why is genocide wrong? So was the Holocaust right or wrong? Well, 99% of humans are going to say, well, it was wrong. Well, why was it wrong? Well, wrong because you can't kill people. Why? Why can't you kill people? Why can't you just herd people up that you don't like and put them in a gas chamber? Why can't you do that? Because it was not against the law, right? You had the Nuremberg laws that existed in Germany. So clearly this was not against the law. So you can't appeal to that. You can't say, well, they were breaking the law. Nope. You lived in Germany, you weren't breaking the law. In fact, you were doing the Nazi party a favor if you got ahead of it and just started killing Jews. They just wanted Jews to die. They wanted gypsies to die. They wanted Christians to die. They wanted handicapped people to die. They wanted homosexuals to die, right? So is killing all those people wrong? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, why is it wrong? To what are you appealing? Well, what you're appealing to is you are appealing to this ultimate morality that exists in the universe. And so what theists will say is that ultimate morality is proof that there is an ultimate moral being. And that ultimate moral being, under Anselm's definition, is a maximally great being. He is maximally moral. And so his actions dictate what is moral. You want a really good understanding of the moral argument, you can type in that into YouTube and take a look. So that's the moral argument. Cosmological argument. This is the second argument. So what this argument does is it offers reasons to believe that the cosmos has a first cause or beginning. And it is based on an 11th century Persian Muslim who developed this really simple philosophical theorem we call the Kalam cosmological argument. And the Kalam argument goes as follows. Number one, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Number two, the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, this was postulated in the 11th century, and it still kind of is relevant today. It's important to know that Kalam's argument is saying that nothing, I'm putting quotations around nothing because nothing is a concept, nothing is able to produce something. Something must come from something else because nothing lacks causal power. I know that gets a little philosophical and a little deep, but if you can think about nothing, well, guess what? You can't. You can't think about nothing because nothing is the absence of anything. And it's hard to imagine nothing. Sometimes when you're trying to imagine nothing, you just imagine black. Well, guess what? Black is something. That's not nothing. Nothing is the absence of something or the absence of anything. And so nothing doesn't possess causal power because nothing is nothing, not something. If nothing has a little bit of something in it, then it's not nothing. It's something. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but stay with me. So here's the cosmological argument, right? I just defined nothing. It means absolutely nothing. It's one of the most effective arguments that theists use because nothing in the natural world begins to exist without a cause. So the natural world began to exist, and it began to exist because it was caused to exist. So if the universe has a beginning, then it must have a cause that exists outside of itself. So the universe didn't create itself. It was created with something that existed outside of the universe. Now, the universe is everything we know. It's every planet. It's every solar system. It's every black hole. It's dark matter. It's everything you can see. It's everything you can't see. The universe is everything that exists. And so this universe was created by something that is not bound by the properties of the created universe because it exists outside of the universe. So the theory of the beginning of the universe that theists argue, that Kalam argued, the Muslim philosopher Kalam, is supported by modern cosmology and the Big Bang. And we'll discuss the Big Bang in just a minute. But let's see how people will object to Kalam. So let's pick Kalam apart just a little bit to see if it holds up. So Kalam suggests that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Well, you may say, well, who created God? Well, Kalam said everything. He doesn't say everything that exists. He says everything that begins to exist. What is the definition of God? A maximally great being. If your idea of God is something else created God, then that something else that created God is God. Because God is a maximally great being. He is that which no greater being can be imagined. So Kalam doesn't say everything that exists. He says everything that begins to exist. And as a maximally great being, God does not begin to exist. God just exists. Now that blows your mind. It blows my mind. But that is the definition of God. So that would exclude anything in the present universe, which, as we know, began to exist. So under Kalam's philosophical postulation, everything that begins to exist, quoting there, would include everything but God. God is infinite with no beginning. If God were not infinite with no beginning, then he would not meet the definition of God. that would mean he would be created by something, and then that something would be God. So you just keep going until you get to that infinite being with no beginning. So this last sentence is for all the philosophers in the room. God is logically infinite. And in order to create time, space, and matter, God must reside outside the realm of time, space, and matter. I hope that makes sense to you. So for time, space, and matter to exist, which that is the sum of the universe, time, space, and matter, something with power to create time, space, and matter has to exist. And if that being is able to create time, space, and matter, then that being would be infinitely greater than time, space, and matter. All right, let's talk about the Big Bang. So Albert Einstein was a genius, right? That's kind of the standard name you go to when you want to say that someone's really smart. Einstein proposed in his general theory of relativity that the universe was in a steady state. Forgive me for drinking. So Albert Einstein came up with this theory of relativity, general theory, and he said the universe is just sitting still. Mathematician Alexander Friedman discovered that Einstein made a mistake. As a result, turns out the universe, theoretically, according to Alexander Friedman, is not in a steady state, but the universe is expanding. So in 1929, Edwin Hubble, who the Hubble telescope is named after, looked through a telescope and observed about a dozen galaxies near Earth were moving away from Earth at high speeds. And he saw this because he saw colors, the changes in colors of light. So what Hubble did, the telescope, is he was able to verify Friedman's theory that the universe was expanding outward. So the universe is moving. It's not sitting still. It's moving. It's expanding. So if you were to stand in the geometric center of a body of water, you were to drop a pebble into that body of water, it would ripple from the center out. And so that is, and we're going to get to that illustration again, but those circles moving out, that's what the universe is doing. It's moving out. In 1965, two physicists, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, theorized that if the universe came into being through a tremendous explosion, then it would produce radiation that could be measured. And guess what they did? They did some experiments and they discovered that the radiation that they thought would exist actually does exist. And they made the most significant discovery in 500 years of astronomy. And they confirmed that the universe can be traced to one original singularity. And that singularity is labeled the Big Bang. So let's go back to my illustration about if you were to stand in the geometric center of a body of water and you were to drop a pebble. The moment the pebble touches the water is the singularity that produces the ripples. So what Penzias, Wilson, and Friedman all sort of together came up with is that at some point there was nothing. And then there was a tremendous expulsion of energy out of the nothing. And that tremendous expulsion of energy created a shock wave that brought the universe into existence. And the shock wave was so tremendous that the universe is still moving outward. And that singularity is referred to as the Big Bang. Even though it wasn't really a bang, it was more energy, which I guess what an explosion is. But the Big Bang is just what we call it because that's the visual that we get. Stephen Hawking, who's no fan of theism, said that almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. So modern cosmology supports the theory that the present universe began ex nihilo, out of nothing. So there was nothing, and there was an explosion, and then there was something, and that something is still moving. So why does this matter to Kalam? Because in the 20th century, the Big Bang, the discovery of the Big Bang, reveals the truth of a philosophical argument developed in the 11th century. Whatever begins to exist as a cause, the universe began to exist via the Big Bang. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Big Bang, then, is the most significant scientific discovery in history, which aligns with major religious belief regarding the existence of God. All right. So, when it comes to Judeo-Christians that make up the bulk of who we are here in the United States, Jews and Christians both have the same creation narrative in the book of Genesis. And so, does the Big Bang compete with or complement the Judeo-Christian idea of creation? Now, if you are not familiar with the biblical idea of creation, you can pause the video, you can find a Bible, or just Google it. And the first 3 chapters of Genesis, really the first chapters where you get the cosmology. But the first chapter of Genesis talks about these days of creation, where on the first day, light was created, and the second day and third day. It uses the word day. And so there's this idea that if the Big Bang is real, then it disproves the biblical narrative that that created the earth, would say earth, but really creation, the universe, was created in 6 24-hour periods. So does the Big Bang negate the story in Genesis? Let's look at it. All right, so the day used in the book of Genesis is Yom. And that day, the word was used before the earth and sun were created, indicating that day may not be a 24-hour period. To give you a good example, and I think I've used this example in this lecture series for something else. But in English, we have the word day. And how you interpret my use of the word day is based on context, the context in which I use the term. And so if I say to you, I'm going to go to the store on this specific day, then you know that what I mean by day is that there is a very specific 24-hour period on the calendar in a specific year and month and week. There's a really specific 24-hour period that I'm referring to, that I'm going to go to the store, right? That use of day is a very specific use. If I say to you, back in my day, we did things differently, well, then I'm not referring to a specific 24-hour period. I am referring to a period of time. Well, the Hebrew word for day, which is yom, is used exactly the same way. And the only way to properly interpret the word yom is to interpret it in context. Well, unfortunately, what we don't have in the Genesis account is a conclusive context for what day means. For instance, if day is a 24-hour period based on the revolution of the earth and the position of the sun, the first day in biblical creation, light was created, and then days later, the sun was created. So there was a day before there was an actual earth. what were you doing to measure day there, because Earth didn't exist? And so you don't have enough context. Not early. You might could say that there's context later in the creation narrative, but in those first few quote days, you don't have enough context. So day may be a 24-hour period. The other issue is that if you're going to say that the first 6 days were 24-hour periods, well, on the seventh day, God rested, and we don't have that day ended anywhere in the Old or the New Testament, like you might say the other 6 days. So that means, at the very least, the seventh day is a considerably longer day, a day that's still going because God rested from his creative activity. So if the seventh day is seemingly never ending, it's reasonable to think that the other 6 days were not 24-hour periods as well. Maybe there's a good argument that they were. The point of this is not to argue that they were 24-hour days or that they were not. Point of this is to say that you can't make a slam dunk case grammatically that yom means 24 hours, and it actually points to that it was not 24 hours, that it was periods of time. And that certainly lines up with both the geographic and the cosmological evidence that we have. So the amount of time following the 6 days of creation can't be dated. Like, you can look at genealogies. The early parts of the Bible have genealogies, particularly Genesis, through the use of Toledoth statements. You can't really date the earth through those genealogies because they weren't meant to be detailed chronologies, and it would use the patriarchal record. This person was a son of this person, was a son of this person, was a son of this person. Sometimes it would skip a generation, and son of or father of, rather, not son of, father of, could mean grandfather. It could mean actual father. So the genealogies aren't science. And I would argue that if you read the book of Genesis and you're looking for science, then you're going to be disappointed, because at least from a Christian and a Judaic perspective, the book of Genesis is not science, it's revelation. It's God telling humans stuff about God. And it's not meant to be a science book. So nearly all the world's religion assert the existence of a divine being. There's an argument among atheists that exists that says that religious people only believe what they believe based on no evidence, and they just believe blind faith. Well, that's not the case historically. Historically, what most religions will say is that faith is a necessary element of the religion, but not blind faith. And through the history of humanity, especially Christian history, Judaic and Christian history, and Muslim history, scientific discovery has been done in the name of religion and not opposed to the religion. And religious people have been seeking a way to reconcile faith with science and philosophy for a lot longer than you and I have been around. So, for Bo on this, two of the best arguments theists use are the moral argument and the cosmological argument. I wish that we had more time to really dive in to the intricacies of that, but hopefully what this lecture will do, and what it's designed to do, it's not designed to go into all the nuances of the moral argument or even all the nuances of the cosmological argument. What it's designed to do as part of a world religions class, and in this class we like religion, we're religious in this class, and we think religion is cool, is just to say that theists are not just interested in blind faith, and theists have arguments that are based in philosophy and in science for making an argument that God exists. Two of those arguments that are certainly worthy of more investigation by you, if you're watching this video, is the moral argument and the cosmological argument. Thank you so much for participating in this lecture series, and I hope to see you in one of the other series soon.